Welcome to Life Stories, where sometimes the quietest places hide the loudest ghosts. Imagine spending 8 years in total silence, no visitors, no phone, no forgiveness, because the last time you opened your door, it cost you everything. But what if, one stormy night, that same door echoed with desperate knocks, and on the other side stood 10 women, hunted, wounded, and carrying a secret that could burn the world down? Would you turn them away or risk your life to shelter them? This isn't just a story about survival. It's about redemption, buried grief in the moment a man must choose, stay hidden or finally stand for something again. Stay with us. What's coming will break your heart and maybe, just maybe, rebuild it too. Now, the wind howled like a wounded animal through the broken pines that rimmed Jacob Ryder's land, carrying the bite of winter and the memory of screams he tried to forget. His cabin, perched on the edge of Broken Ridge, Colorado, had stood silent for 8 years. No visitors, no letters, no footprints in the snow but his own and the hooves of the 2 horses he trusted more than any man. He didn't need people, not after what happened. Not after the fire and the flags and the lies. The storm tonight was biblical. Rain lashed against the windows in sheets, rattling the shutters as if the ghosts of the past were demanding entry. Inside, the fire cracked in the hearth, throwing orange light across weathered walls and shelves lined with untouched whiskey bottles. Jacob sat in a wooden chair, repairing an old bridle with hands that still bore the muscle memory of detonating charges and burying the dead. The air smelled of wet earth, pine smoke, and the quiet kind of grief that settles into wood. Then came the knock. Not the uncertain tap of a lost traveler, not the familiar rhythm of a neighbor. This was raw, desperate. Someone pounding with both fists as if death were at their heels and the door the last salvation. Jacob froze mid-stitch. He hadn't heard that kind of knock since the night the soldiers came, speaking of bandits and insurgents and orders from above. That night ended in fire and 2 graves. Another knock, harder this time, followed by voices, women's voices, foreign, low, urgent. One cut through the other, sharp and deliberate. "We know you're there. Please, let us in, just for tonight." Her accent wasn't from the cities. It carried the weight of dust, of old land and old wars. Navajo. That word hadn't passed through Jacob's mind in years, but it hit now like a bullet between the ribs. He stood slowly, eyes narrowing, his hand hovering near the rifle above the mantel. He hadn't fired it in years, but he'd oiled it every month out of habit or fear. Another voice came, trembling but fierce. "They're coming. If we die here, so will you." The door stood between him and them like a judge between verdicts. And the verdict, he realized, wouldn't just change the night. It might change everything. Jacob unbarred the door. It fought him as though 8 years of solitude had rusted more than hinges. The moment it creaked open, the cold slammed into him, and with it came 10 silhouettes cloaked in wet shawls and exhaustion. One carried a baby swaddled in a stained blanket, its breath shallow, eyes fluttering. Another leaned on a blood-soaked arm, teeth gritted, the bone likely cracked. And standing at their head was the woman who had spoken, the one with the voice like flint. "I'm Mara," she said. "These are my people." Her English was precise, every word forged from experience. A gash above her brow bled freely down her cheek, but she never broke eye contact. Jacob stepped aside. They moved inside like shadows, fast and quiet, but the scent they brought wasn't just wet wool and fear. There was something else. Blood, not entirely theirs. Jacob noticed it when one of the women placed a bundle by the hearth and the baby inside whimpered, then coughed. A sound too dry, too brittle. As he bolted the door behind them, Jacob's eyes met Mara's again. "Who's chasing you?" She hesitated, then said, "Captain Travis Cole, 8th Cavalry." The name slithered into Jacob's spine. He knew Cole, or rather, he'd known men like him, soldiers who used flags as cover for slaughter. Mara's jaw tensed. "He calls us thieves, insurgents, but what we really are is inconvenient." Jacob nodded slowly. He looked down at the baby, then at the women tending each other's wounds without complaint, without panic. Survivors. Warriors, maybe. But what chilled him more was the sense that they hadn't just stumbled here by chance. "You came here," he said, voice low. "You knew this place." Mara's eyes flickered. Confirmation and something else. 8 years ago, you stopped the railroad crew from blasting through our canyon, said the land was sacred. Her voice softened, but not with warmth, with memory. You were the last white man to call us neighbors. Then you disappeared. Jacob turned toward the fire, his thoughts circling like wolves. He hadn't done it out of mercy. He'd done it because Sarah, his wife, had believed in peace. She'd convinced him that not all wars needed bullets. And for that faith, she died. Behind him, one of the younger women began to cry. Another wrapped an arm around her shoulders and murmured in Navajo, words Jacob didn't understand. The rain slowed just enough for the silence to grow ominous. Jacob stood by the window, the weight of Mara's words pressing like a stone on his chest. The storm outside had changed, no longer furious, now calculated, like breath held before a kill. Mara and her women had settled quickly into his home, not as guests, but as operatives, setting traps along windows, counting rifle cartridges, examining the field of fire beyond the porch. Their movements were practiced, quiet and grim. He recognized the pattern. These weren't desperate survivors. They were preparing for war. Jacob found himself by the cellar door, his hand on the old iron latch. Beneath his floorboards was a hidden space he'd once dug out with bare hands after Sarah died, not to hide supplies, but to bury the parts of himself that couldn't survive daylight, the uniform, the dynamite, the maps, the guilt. Now, as boots thudded above, those pieces were being unearthed again. Mara approached without sound. "We found your cache," she said simply, holding out a coiled length of wire fuse. "You built this place to defend yourself. Let it defend others." Jacob didn't reply. His eyes were on the fireplace where the baby now slept, chest rising shallowly. The girl, Lena, Mara had called her, sat nearby, her arm in a sling, her gaze vacant. She couldn't have been more than 16. Dirt and dried blood streaked her cheek, but it was the silence in her that gnawed at him. The kind of silence born from witnessing something that shouldn't be real. "They burned her uncle alive," Mara said, following his gaze. "Made the rest of us watch. Captain Cole said it was justice." Her voice was flat, but Jacob heard the venom beneath it. The boy who lit the fire wasn't older than Lena. Jacob swallowed hard. He remembered fires like that, remembered holding Sarah in the smoke, her lungs wheezing from the tear gas some ambitious lieutenant had ordered dropped on a protest camp. Remembered thinking it couldn't get worse until it did. He turned toward the window again. The trees below the ridge had stilled. In the break of rain, he could hear the sound that changed everything. Horses, moving slow, controlled. He counted 6, then 9. No yelling, no confusion. These weren't scouts, they were wolves. "Cole's advance unit," Mara murmured. "They'll sweep the cabin first. Make sure we're soft before Reeve arrives with the hammer." Jacob stiffened. "Reeve? Colonel Damon Reeve," she said. "Cole's commanding officer, the man who ordered the raids, who signed off on the executions. He's coming himself. This isn't just cleanup, it's a message." Jacob's blood went cold. Reeve was a name from another life, one he hadn't heard since the tribunal disbanded his old unit and sent everyone home with pensions and silence. Reeve had been praised for efficiency, decorated for peacekeeping. But Jacob had seen what happened in San Rosario. What Reeve called neutralization had been a village of farmers slaughtered at dusk, and Jacob had helped lay the mines. He staggered back from the window, breathing shallow. It wasn't just Mara and her people who were being hunted tonight. It was him. Reeve didn't send men into storms for witnesses. He sent them for closure. In the corner, Mara knelt and adjusted a tripwire near the doorframe. Her eyes flicked up to Jacob. "You knew him." He nodded. "He left good men in the jungle to die, then gave speeches about valor." "You were one of them?" "I was one who came back." The fire snapped. For a moment, all they heard was the slow breathing of the baby. Then Mara said, "You could leave now. No one would blame you." Jacob met her eyes. "He already took everything. If I leave now, he finishes the job." A heavy knock broke the quiet. Not at the front door, but the back. 3 raps, then silence. Jacob raised his rifle instinctively. Mara motioned her women to take cover. Another knock. Then a voice, male, trembling but familiar. "Please, if anyone's inside, I have a child. I didn't know what they were doing. I didn't sign up for this." Jacob's heart stalled. He recognized the voice. Years ago, he trained with a young man named Zachary Reeve, Damon's only son. Fresh-faced, idealistic, always questioning orders. The same voice that now begged through a storm for sanctuary. Mara's hand gripped her knife. It's a trick. He's bait. No, Jacob said quietly. He's the boy Reeve would never send into fire. If he's here, something's already broken. They opened the door slowly. Outside stood a soaked soldier. No rifle, hands raised, his uniform half torn. Cradled in his arms was a toddler, wrapped in a wet coat. Zach's eyes widened when he saw Jacob. Sir, it's really you. Then, brokenly, they lied. My father lied about all of it. Mara moved forward, knife lowered but ready. Why are you here? The first shot rang out just before dawn, cracking through the cold like a bone snapping under pressure. Jacob Ryder didn't flinch. He'd been waiting for it. Every nerve in his body was tuned now, not to fear, but to clarity. In the gray light of early morning, Broken Ridge was no longer a haven. It was a battleground. And Jacob, for the first time in 8 years, was wide awake in it. The cabin had been fortified overnight. Mara's women moved like ghosts through the fog, taking positions they'd mapped out with military precision. Traps were set at every likely entry point. Tripwires along the tree line, sharpened iron buried beneath the mud, snares disguised beneath fallen pine needles. The cellar was now their fallback, rigged with enough dynamite to bring down the whole ridge if it came to that. It wasn't a bluff. Zach Reeve, pale but resolved, stood at the far corner of the room, cradling the child he had risked everything to save. The little girl, barely more than 2, clung to his uniform with a kind of trust that pierced deeper than bullets. Zach had offered to go back to reason with his father, to surrender if it bought time. Mara had said no. Jacob had said no, because some lines once crossed couldn't be recrossed by apologies or blood. Jacob checked his rifle again, then glanced at Mara. She stood at the front door, blade at her hip, a revolver slung low, her gaze fixed on the fog curling beyond the porch. Her face was unreadable, but in the flicker of firelight, Jacob saw it. The same thing he'd seen in Sarah's eyes once long ago, resolve hardened by loss. And then Reeve came. They heard his voice before they saw his face, calm, cold, amplified by the hush of the wind. Jacob Ryder, step out, or we burn this place to the ground. Jacob leaned in the window, peering out through a slit in the shutter. There were at least 40 soldiers stretched along the ridge, their coats dark with frost, rifles raised. And at the center, mounted atop a black horse with eyes like wet obsidian, was Colonel Damon Reeve. Not a wrinkle out of place, not a doubt in his voice. He didn't come for a fight. He came for a message. Jacob stepped out onto the porch slowly, rifle lowered but not surrendered. You came a long way, Damon, he called. All this for 10 women and a hermit. Reeve's smile was thin. Don't flatter yourself. I came to erase a mistake, one I should have handled years ago. Jacob nodded slowly. She's dead, you know, Sarah. Your men put a bullet in her back while they were busy torching my past. Reeve's expression didn't change. Collateral, regrettable. Jacob felt it then, the final crack. The part of him that had held back, still hoping for some fanko of humanity in the man who'd once led him. It was gone now. She was unarmed. Jacob said, stepping down into the mud. So were they. So were all of them. Reeve shrugged. Unarmed doesn't mean innocent. Before Jacob could speak again, a voice rose behind him. Mara's. Strong, defiant. You tell your men to stand down, Colonel, or you'll be collecting them in pieces. Reeve raised an eyebrow, amused. You think I'm afraid of a few renegade women and a washed-up sapper? Mara stepped into view, rifle in hand. I think you should be. He signaled with 2 fingers. Gunfire erupted. The first wave came from the eastern flank, where Jacob had expected it. He detonated the line of traps buried along the slope, sending 2 soldiers flying and the rest scattering into chaos. Mara's women responded in unison, their bullets precise, not wild, trained, not desperate. Jacob moved like a machine, covering Zach and the child as they retreated toward the cellar entrance. But Reeve had planned for traps. The second wave came from the north, breaching the rear wall where the cabin met the ridge. It was brutal, loud. Bodies collided in the smoke. Screams mingled with thunder. Jacob took a round to the shoulder but kept moving, adrenaline stealing the pain. 2 soldiers fell at his feet, One shot, the other taken down by Lena, the youngest among them, who now fought with the same fire that had burned down her childhood. And then, silence. The last of the gunfire died out. Smoke clung to the broken doorway like a ghost refusing to leave. Inside the cabin, two of Mara's women lay motionless. One was still breathing. The other wasn't. Jacob found Mara kneeling over the fallen, her face stained with ash and grief, but her hands steady. Outside, Colonel Reeve called again. Enough! You made your point, but you can't win this. Jacob stepped out into the open, blood seeping from his sleeve, mud caking his boots. He saw Reeve now, closer, older, but untouched, flanked by new reinforcements. More men, too many, and then the twist. From the tree line behind Reeve's forces, a dozen riders emerged, bearing the seal of the U.S. Marshal's office. At their head, Deputy Marshal Amelia Grant, badge glinting, warrant raised. Colonel Reeve, she called, you're under arrest for obstruction of justice, conspiracy to conceal military crimes, and unlawful execution of civilians under Article 118. The look on Reeve's face cracked. Just a little. You have no jurisdiction